Sometimes the most expensive decision a man can make has nothing to do with money. Sometimes it begins with a single smile. The boardroom on the 42nd floor overlooked the glittering skyline of downtown Chicago, where morning sunlight reflected off glass towers like polished steel. Inside, 12 executives sat around a walnut conference table that stretched nearly 30 feet from end to end. Digital screens displayed charts, projections, and one number that seemed to matter more than anything else: $500 million. Lawyers adjusted their ties. Financial advisors whispered over printed contracts. Investment partners checked their watches, knowing this acquisition would reshape an entire industry before the closing bell on Wall Street. At precisely 9:17 a.m., billionaire William Carter stood at the head of the table, calm as ever, reviewing the final page of an agreement months in the making. He had built his reputation on never hesitating. Every decision he made carried confidence. Every signature changed lives. Every meeting ended exactly as planned. That was why no one questioned him when he suddenly stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. The room fell strangely quiet. William's eyes had drifted beyond the presentation screen toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the hotel courtyard below. At first, no one else understood what had captured his attention. Then he quietly placed the expensive fountain pen onto the table, closed the leather folder in front of him, and took one slow step toward the glass. The chief financial officer cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter?" There was no answer. Outside, nearly 40 stories below, the hotel's garden cafe welcomed guests with white umbrellas, flower boxes overflowing with spring blossoms, and the soft melody of a pianist playing familiar classics. Business travelers hurried between meetings while tourists lingered over coffee. It looked like any ordinary morning. Except it wasn't. Near the corner patio sat a little girl with golden hair tied into a loose ponytail. 7-year-old Lily Carter wore a pale blue sweater and quietly stirred whipped cream into a cup of hot chocolate. Without looking up, ever since her mother's passing 2 years earlier, silence had become her closest companion. Therapists had called it grief. Teachers called it withdrawal. William simply called it heartbreak. For months, he had watched his daughter move through life without laughter, without excitement, without the bright curiosity every child deserved. Yet at that very moment, something impossible happened. A young waitress carrying a breakfast tray accidentally noticed Lily struggling to keep the marshmallows from slipping onto the tablecloth. Instead of rushing away to serve another customer, she smiled warmly, knelt beside the little girl, and folded a paper napkin into the shape of a tiny swan. It took less than 30 seconds. She said something William couldn't hear through the thick glass. Lily blinked once, then twice, and for the first time in what felt like forever, his daughter smiled. It wasn't polite. It wasn't forced. It was real. Small dimples appeared on her cheeks. Her shoulders relaxed. She even laughed softly as the paper swan balanced beside her mug. William felt the air leave his lungs. Around him, executives continued waiting for instructions, unaware that the most important moment of his year was unfolding far below a room filled with contracts. He looked at the unfinished agreement worth $500 million, then back at the little girl whose happiness no amount of wealth had been able to buy. Without another word, William picked up his jacket, turned toward the conference room door, and quietly said, "The meeting can wait." William Carter barely remembered walking out of the conference room. Behind him, voices called his name, reminding him that investors had flown across 3 states, that attorneys had spent months negotiating every clause, that one delayed signature could move millions of dollars before the markets closed. He heard every word, yet none of it seemed louder than the gentle laugh that had drifted upward from the hotel courtyard only moments before. By the time the elevator doors opened into the marble lobby, he had already made peace with whatever financial consequences might follow. Some opportunities could be scheduled again. Childhood could not. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the cafe entrance as sunlight filtered through flowering dogwood trees planted around the outdoor terrace. Lily remained seated at the small round table, carefully balancing the folded paper swan on the edge of her cup as though it were the most precious treasure in the world. Across from her stood the young waitress, arranging silverware onto a nearby table with quiet efficiency. She moved without drawing attention to herself, greeting every guest with the same gentle smile, never lingering long enough to expect praise. William slowed his steps before approaching. For the first time in years, he chose to watch instead of interrupt. Lily looked up at the waitress again. "Can you make another one?" she asked softly. Her voice was almost a whisper, but to William it sounded louder than applause. The waitress smiled. "Only if you promise to teach me how to make the first one fly." Lily giggled. A tiny sound, barely noticeable to anyone else. Yet William felt something inside him loosen, as though a heavy door had quietly opened after being locked for far too long. He remembered another laugh, years earlier, when his late wife, Grace, had filled their kitchen with music while teaching Lily how to bake blueberry muffins on rainy Saturday mornings. Since losing Grace, every room in their home had grown quieter. Their mansion had become spotless, elegant, and painfully empty. Nannies came and went. Tutors offered encouragement. Child psychologists filled notebooks with observations and treatment plans. They all cared. They all tried. None of them could reach the lonely little girl sitting behind invisible walls. Yet somehow, in less than 1 minute, a stranger wearing a simple navy apron had found the door no one else could see. William finally stepped forward. "Good morning," he said politely. The waitress turned with the same welcoming smile she had offered every customer that morning. "Good morning, sir. Can I bring you some coffee?" There was no flicker of recognition in her eyes. No surprise. No nervousness. She did not know she was speaking to one of the wealthiest men in America. To her, he was simply another father joining his daughter for breakfast. "That would be wonderful," William replied. "And maybe one of those cinnamon rolls my daughter keeps pretending she is not interested in." Lily quickly shook her head. "Daddy," the waitress laughed softly. "I think I have heard that answer from almost every child who ended up eating the last bite." Lily smiled again, this time without hesitation. As the waitress disappeared toward the kitchen, William noticed several employees greeting her warmly by name. "Emily," one chef called through the service window. "Table 6 needs another orange juice." "Coming right up," she answered cheerfully before disappearing behind the swinging doors. William repeated the name silently to himself. Emily. He did not know why it mattered. He only knew that for the first time since Grace was gone, his daughter looked less like a child carrying unbearable sadness, and more like the little girl she had once been. Over the next several mornings, William quietly rearranged his schedule in ways that would have shocked anyone who worked for him. Breakfast meetings disappeared from his calendar. Conference calls were pushed into the afternoon. His executive assistant politely informed confused clients that unexpected family priorities required slight adjustments. No one argued. They had learned long ago that William Carter rarely changed his plans without good reason. Yet even he could not have fully explained why he kept returning to the same cafe. Every morning at 8 o'clock, Lily asked the same hopeful question before climbing into the car. "Are we going to see Emily today?" William would glance at her through the rearview mirror, noticing a brightness in her eyes that had been absent for years. "If she is working," he would answer, trying to sound casual. The drive always seemed shorter now. The city slowly awakened around them as delivery trucks unloaded fresh produce. Joggers crossed riverside paths, and sunlight painted warm reflections across the Chicago River. Inside the cafe, the familiar aroma of fresh cinnamon, roasted coffee beans, and warm butter welcomed every guest like an old friend. Emily greeted each table exactly the same way. She remembered children's favorite pancakes. She asked elderly couples about their grandchildren. She carried heavy trays with effortless grace while somehow never making anyone feel rushed. There was nothing dramatic about her kindness. It was steady, quiet, and genuine, the kind that asked for nothing in return. One Tuesday morning, Lily walked through the entrance holding the paper swan Emily had folded several days earlier. The edges had become slightly bent from being carried everywhere. Emily noticed it immediately and smiled. "He is still flying?" she asked playfully. Lily nodded with complete seriousness. "He sleeps beside my bed every night." Emily placed one hand gently over her heart. "Then I think he found the perfect home." William watched the exchange without interrupting. He had spent years surrounding his daughter with expensive gifts, private tutors, luxury vacations, and every opportunity money could provide. None of those things had ever earned the expression now resting naturally across Lily's face. As breakfast continued, Emily noticed Lily quietly staring toward a display case filled with colorful pastries shaped like flowers. Before William could offer to buy one, Emily disappeared briefly into the kitchen. A few moments later, she returned carrying a plain sugar cookie and a small container of colored icing. This one was cracked, she explained with an easy smile. The bakery was going to throw it away anyway. I thought maybe an artist could save it. Lily's eyes widened. You think I am an artist? Emily shrugged. I think every 7-year-old should have the chance to prove me right. For the next 20 minutes, Lily carefully decorated the cookie with tiny blue flowers while Emily checked on other customers between conversations. She never hovered. She never tried too hard. She simply made room for a child to feel seen. William noticed something else that morning. Emily treated every guest exactly as she treated Lily. A construction worker covered in drywall dust received the same warm smile as a couple wearing designer suits. A nervous young mother juggling twins received patient encouragement without a hint of frustration. Even when a customer accidentally spilled orange juice across an entire table, Emily quietly grabbed fresh towels and reassured him that everyone had clumsy mornings sometimes. There was no performance in her compassion. It seemed woven into who she was. As William signed the breakfast receipt, he added an unusually generous tip beneath the total. Emily glanced at it before gently handing part of the cash back. Sir, she said kindly, this is much more than breakfast costs. William looked surprised. You earned it. Emily shook her head with a grateful smile. Then let me earn it a little more tomorrow. For the first time in many years, William met someone who seemed completely untouched by wealth, status, or reputation. And although she still had no idea who he really was, he was beginning to wonder whether meeting Emily Brooks might become the most valuable part of every morning. The following Friday morning arrived wrapped in a gentle spring rain that painted the city streets silver and filled the air with the clean scent of wet pavement and blooming magnolia trees. William parked across from the cafe a few minutes earlier than usual, watching raindrops slide slowly down the windshield while Lily quietly hugged her paper swan against her sweater. Do you think Emily likes rainy days? She asked. William smiled faintly. I have a feeling she finds something good in every kind of weather. Inside, the cafe glowed with warm amber lights reflecting against polished wooden tables. Guests shook umbrellas drying near the entrance. Conversations blended softly with the sound of steaming espresso machines, and instrumental jazz drifted gently through hidden speakers. Emily was already moving gracefully between tables, balancing a tray with practiced confidence while greeting every customer as though they were neighbors returning home. When she spotted Lily, her face brightened immediately. Good morning, my favorite artist, she said. Lily held up the paper swan with pride. He survived another night. Emily laughed. Then he deserves a friend. She reached into her apron pocket, removed a square napkin, and within seconds transformed it into a tiny rabbit with folded ears. Lily gasped with delight. William noticed something remarkable. Emily never spoke to children as if they were small. She spoke to them as if their thoughts mattered. After breakfast, Lily wandered toward a small bookshelf tucked beside the fireplace where guests were encouraged to exchange novels and children's books. Emily joined her for a moment, kneeling beside the shelf. Have you ever read Charlotte's Web? She asked. Lily shook her head. Emily carefully removed the worn paperback, its corners softened by years of readers. This was my favorite when I was your age, she said. You can borrow it if you promise one thing. Lily looked up. What? When you finish it, tell me which character made you smile the most. Lily accepted the book with both hands, almost as though it were a priceless treasure. William watched quietly. Money could have purchased 1,000 brand new books, yet somehow this gently worn copy carried a kind of warmth that no luxury edition ever could. As Emily stood to return to work, Lily asked the question that surprised them both. Who used to read it with you? For just the briefest moment, Emily became very still. A soft sadness crossed her eyes before the familiar smile returned. Someone who loved stories very much, she answered gently. And because of that, I still love sharing them. She excused herself politely as another family arrived, leaving William thoughtful. There had been something hidden inside that answer. Not dramatic, not guarded, simply quiet. Later, while Lily colored at the table, William walked toward the register to pay the bill. The cafe manager, an older gentleman polishing coffee cups behind the counter, smiled knowingly. Your daughter seems happier these days. William nodded. She is. The manager glanced toward Emily, who was helping an elderly customer button a raincoat before opening the door for him. Emily has that effect on people. She has been here almost 4 years. Never asks for recognition. Covers extra shifts whenever someone is sick. Brings homemade soup when employees have rough weeks. I keep telling her she deserves a management position, but she always says she is exactly where she needs to be. William looked across the room again. Emily was laughing with a little boy who proudly showed her a missing front tooth. There was no audience applauding her kindness. No cameras recording the moment. She simply lived that way when no one expected anything from her. As William and Lily prepared to leave, Emily handed Lily a small bookmark decorated with watercolor flowers. "For Charlotte's Web," she said. Lily hugged the book tightly and smiled. "Thank you, Emily." Emily waved as they stepped back into the light rain, unaware that William carried home far more than breakfast that morning. For the first time since losing Grace, he had begun to believe that healing sometimes arrived quietly, wearing an apron instead of a title, offering folded paper animals instead of grand speeches, and changing lives without ever realizing it. The weekend passed quietly, but Emily's thoughtful answer about someone who had once loved stories stayed with William far longer than he expected. Monday morning arrived beneath a pale blue sky, and the cafe slowly filled with its familiar rhythm of clinking coffee cups, warm greetings, and sunlight stretching across polished hardwood floors. Lily had already settled into her favorite chair with Charlotte's Web open across her lap, occasionally smiling at a passage before looking up to see whether Emily had noticed. She always had. "Already making progress?" Emily asked as she refilled William's coffee. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Wilbur is my favorite so far." Emily smiled. "That usually means you have a kind heart." William watched the exchange, then quietly asked, "What made it your favorite book?" Emily looked toward the window for a brief moment, as though the answer lived somewhere beyond the passing traffic. "Because someone once reminded me that the smallest acts of kindness are often remembered the longest," she said softly. Before William could ask another question, an elderly woman entered the cafe using a wooden cane. Emily immediately excused herself and hurried to hold the door open. She guided the woman carefully to her usual table, already, remembering that she preferred oatmeal, fresh strawberries, and hot tea with honey. The older woman reached for Emily's hand before she walked away. "You always remember," she whispered. Emily simply squeezed her hand and smiled. Later that morning, Lily wandered toward the bookshelf again while William stepped outside to answer a brief phone call. As he returned through the service entrance, he accidentally overheard a quiet conversation between the cafe manager and Emily near the kitchen. "You do not have to come in tomorrow," the manager said gently. "I can cover your shift." Emily shook her head with a grateful smile. Tomorrow would have been her birthday. Sitting home makes it harder. William slowed his steps without meaning to listen further, but the next words reached him anyway. "She would be proud of the way you keep loving other children," the manager said quietly. Emily lowered her eyes for a moment before answering. "Some days I hope that is true." There was no bitterness in her voice. Only tenderness. Only longing. William stepped back before they noticed him, feeling as though he had unintentionally walked into something deeply personal. A few minutes later, Emily returned to the dining room exactly as she always did, greeting families with the same warm smile, laughing gently with children, and carrying breakfast plates as though nothing heavy rested on her heart. Yet now William understood there was a story behind that smile. It explained the pause when Lily had asked who once read Charlotte's Web with her. It explained why every lonely child seemed to matter so much. As breakfast ended, Lily approached Emily holding the finished bookmark in one hand. "Can I ask you something?" she said carefully. Emily knelt beside her. "Of course." Lily hesitated. "Do you ever miss someone so much that your heart feels quiet?" William froze. Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she gently tucked a loose strand of Lily's hair behind her ear. "Every day," she said honestly. "But I learned something important." Lily waited. Love does not disappear when someone is gone. Sometimes it simply changes into the kindness we give other people. Lily looked down at the paper rabbit and swan resting beside her book. Then she wrapped her small arms around Emily without saying another word. Emily returned the hug gently, closing her eyes for just a second before smiling again. Standing only a few feet away, William suddenly understood what every specialist had missed. Emily was not healing Lily by trying to erase her sadness. She was quietly teaching her that grief and hope could exist in the same heart at the same time. And for the first time since Grace had left this world, William found himself believing those words applied to him as well. By the middle of the following week, the quiet routine that had brought so much peace began to change in ways no one expected. William and Lily arrived at the cafe just after 8 o'clock, but something felt different before they even reached the entrance. Two photographers stood across the street pretending to drink coffee while pointing long camera lenses toward the patio. A black luxury sedan waited nearby with tinted windows. Several unfamiliar faces lingered outside, glancing repeatedly toward the front door instead of their phones. William recognized the signs immediately. Someone had connected the dots. His repeated visits had not gone unnoticed. Inside, Emily welcomed them with the same warm smile she always wore, completely unaware that whispers had already begun beyond the cafe walls. Lily happily showed her that she had finished Charlotte's Web the night before, carefully explaining why Wilbur reminded her that people should never feel forgotten. Emily listened with genuine attention, celebrating every thought as though it deserved to be heard. Nearby customers smiled quietly at the conversation, never realizing that someone outside had already captured dozens of photographs through the windows. Before noon, the first story appeared online. It did not ask questions. It invented answers. Headlines suggested that an unknown waitress had somehow captured the attention of one of America's most influential business leaders. Anonymous commentators guessed at motives they could not possibly know. Some insisted she had planned every encounter. Others claimed she was chasing wealth, influence, or fame. By lunchtime, thousands of strangers who had never met Emily Brooks believed they understood her life. Williams' communications director called 3 times in less than an hour. Public relations advisors recommended issuing a statement. Attorneys suggested legal responses against false reporting. William ignored every recommendation. His concern was not for his reputation. It was for Emily, who had never asked to become part of anyone else's story. The following morning, Lily rushed eagerly toward the cafe, carrying a drawing she had made for Emily. It showed 3 smiling figures sitting beneath a tree, surrounded by paper swans and rabbits. But as they stepped inside, the familiar warmth felt strangely incomplete. Another waitress approached with an apologetic expression. "Good morning," she said gently. "Emily will not be here today." Lily looked around the dining room, expecting Emily to appear from the kitchen. "Is she sick?" The waitress hesitated before answering. She decided to take some time away. Lily slowly lowered the drawing. William noticed the cafe manager standing quietly behind the counter, his usual cheerful expression replaced by concern. After Lily settled into her chair, William walked over. "What happened?" he asked softly. The manager sighed. "Someone recognized you. Reporters started calling yesterday afternoon. They waited outside until closing. Emily found articles about herself online last night." He paused before continuing. "She came in early this morning, thanked everyone for the opportunity, and left an envelope with her resignation." William stared at him in disbelief. "She resigned." The manager nodded sadly. "She said she never wanted her presence to bring trouble to the cafe or discomfort to your family. That is exactly the kind of person she is. She chose to disappear rather than defend herself." At the table, Lily kept looking toward the kitchen door every few seconds. Her hot chocolate cooled untouched beside the paper rabbit and paper swan. Finally, she looked at her father with quiet confusion. Did Emily do something wrong? William knelt beside his daughter and gently took her small hand. "No, sweetheart." His voice was calm, but his heart felt heavier than it had in years. "Sometimes kind people get misunderstood." Lily looked down at her drawing, carefully smoothing one folded corner with her fingertips. "Then who was going to tell her that I finished the book?" William had no answer. As morning sunlight spilled across the empty space where Emily always stood, he realized that losing a person who quietly brought hope into everyday life could leave a silence every bit as noticeable as the sound of laughter that once filled it. The silence followed them home. Lily placed her unfinished drawing beside the paper swan and paper rabbit on the living room table, then quietly disappeared into her room without asking for dessert or turning on her favorite music. William stood alone in the kitchen as evening sunlight stretched across polished hardwood floors, making the empty house feel larger than ever. He had spent years believing that every problem could be solved with enough planning, enough determination, or enough resources. Yet none of those things had prepared him for watching one kind woman walk away simply because strangers had mistaken compassion for ambition. The next morning, he canceled every appointment on his calendar. His assistant stared in disbelief as he pushed aside presentations worth millions of dollars. "Reschedule everything that can wait," William said calmly. "And the rest?" she asked. He looked out the office window for a long moment. "The rest was never as important as I thought." He returned to the cafe hoping someone might know where Emily had gone, but the manager could only offer a gentle shake of his head. "She did not leave a forwarding address," he explained. "She only thanked us for becoming part of her family and said she needed someplace quiet." William glanced toward the empty table where Lily had once laughed over paper animals. "Did she mention anything she loved outside of work?" The manager thought carefully. "Only one thing. On her days off, she volunteered somewhere. She always said helping children reminded her that hope grows slowly, but it grows." That single sentence became the beginning of William's search. He refused to hire private investigators or use corporate databases. It did not feel right. Emily had never treated him like a billionaire. He would not use wealth to intrude upon the life she had chosen. Instead, he drove through neighborhoods he had rarely visited, stopping at community centers, libraries, food pantries, and church outreach programs. At every location, he carried the same respectful question. "Have you ever met a woman named Emily Brooks who enjoys working with children?" Most people smiled politely before apologizing that they had not. Days passed. Lily grew quieter again, although each evening she carefully dusted the paper swan and rabbit before placing them back on the bookshelf beside Charlotte's Web. Then, on a bright Saturday morning, William followed a recommendation from an elderly volunteer who remembered an Emily serving lunch every weekend at a neighborhood community kitchen on the west side of the city. The building was simple, with red brick walls, blue window frames, and a small vegetable garden growing beside the entrance. The smell of fresh vegetable soup drifted through the open doors while children laughed nearby as they colored pictures beneath a covered patio. William stepped inside without announcing who he was. There, wearing a plain green volunteer apron instead of the Navy cafe uniform, stood Emily. She was helping a little boy tie his shoelaces before handing another child an extra apple with a smile that looked exactly the same as it had in the cafe. Nothing about her suggested disappointment or resentment. She had simply carried her kindness somewhere else. Emily looked up as the front door opened. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face. "Mr. Carter," she said softly. William smiled gently. "Please. It is William." She glanced around the room, filled with families sharing lunch. "I did not expect to see you here." He looked at the children gathering around a craft table covered with crayons, paper, and folded napkins shaped into tiny animals. "I was told this is where hope grows slowly." Emily lowered her eyes with a quiet smile, recognizing her own words. Before either of them could continue, a familiar voice echoed from the doorway behind William. "Emily." Lily came running across the room, holding Charlotte's Web against her chest. Emily's eyes filled with emotion as the little girl wrapped her arms around her once again. And in that gentle embrace, William realized that some of the most important journeys in life do not lead people toward success. They simply lead them back to the people who helped their hearts remember how to smile. Emily remained at the community kitchen long after lunch had ended, helping children stack crayons into small boxes and thanking volunteers as folding tables disappeared one by one. Nothing about her routine suggested that she wanted recognition. If anything, she seemed relieved to have found another quiet place where kindness could exist without headlines. Lily spent the afternoon reading aloud to younger children from Charlotte's Web while Emily listened from nearby, smiling every time the little girl's confidence grew stronger. William watched from a distance, saying very little. Some moments deserved silence more than conversation. Before leaving, he approached Emily near the small vegetable garden where tomatoes and herbs swayed gently beneath the afternoon breeze. "I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. Emily looked surprised. "You do not owe me anything." He shook his head. "Because of my position, your life became much harder. You lost a job you loved simply because people invented a story that never existed." Emily folded her hands quietly. "People usually believe what they want to believe. I cannot control that. But I can," William answered calmly. She looked at him with quiet concern. "Please do not make this into a bigger story." I never wanted attention. William smiled gently. Neither did you deserve suspicion. Emily did not reply. The wind carried the scent of fresh basil through the garden, while children laughed inside the building. Finally, she said softly, "If you really want to help me, protect Lily's peace before you protect my reputation." William nodded without hesitation. "I promise." 3 days later, the executive board gathered once again inside the same conference room where a $500 million acquisition still waited for final approval. This time, every chair was filled long before William arrived. Rumors about his recent absences had spread throughout the company, and several directors expected an explanation before business resumed. William entered carrying no prepared speech, no presentation slides, and no legal briefing. He simply stood at the head of the table, looking around the room with the same steady composure that had earned everyone's respect for years. "Before we continue discussing acquisitions," he began quietly, "there is something more important that deserves my attention." The room fell completely silent. William placed a folded paper swan on the conference table beside the contract worth $500 million. Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. "Many of you have seen articles written about me over the past week," he continued. "Those stories suggested that a waitress somehow pursued my attention for personal gain. Every one of those claims was false." No one interrupted. William's voice remained calm. "The truth is much simpler. A kind woman treated my daughter with patience when she believed no one important was watching. She expected nothing in return. She accepted no favors. She even returned part of an overly generous tip because she believed she had not earned it yet." Several board members slowly lowered their eyes. "That woman reminded my daughter how to smile after years of grief. She reminded me that character is revealed by how we treat people who cannot improve our status, increase our wealth, or advance our careers. She did not change my life because she met a billionaire. She changed my life because she chose kindness long before she knew my name." The room remained perfectly still. William looked toward the contract resting beside the paper swan. "We spent every day measuring value through numbers. Revenue, market share, profit margins. Yet none of those measurements explain why my daughter is laughing again. Some things cannot be purchased. They can only be received as gifts from people whose hearts remain generous even when the world misunderstands them." No applause followed his words. There was only thoughtful silence. As the meeting finally turned back to business, every executive seemed to notice the small paper swan resting beside the largest contract of the year, quietly reminding them that the greatest investment any person could make would never appear on a balance sheet. 1 year passed with the quiet certainty that seasons always keep their promises. Spring returned to Chicago, filling neighborhood parks with fresh blossoms and warm breezes that carried the scent of newly cut grass through open windows. On a peaceful Saturday morning, children laughed beneath colorful banners outside a renovated brick building that had once stood empty for decades. Above the entrance hung a simple wooden sign that read, "Grace House for Children." There were no corporate logos covering the walls, no oversized photographs celebrating wealthy donors, and no grand speeches waiting to begin. The building existed for one purpose alone: to give comfort to children carrying grief that felt too heavy for small hearts. Inside, shelves overflowed with donated books, art supplies filled bright wooden cabinets, and every reading corner displayed carefully folded paper swans and rabbits created during weekly craft sessions. Emily walked through the rooms greeting every child by name, remembering birthdays, favorite stories, and even which crayons each one reached for first. She had accepted William's financial support only after making him promise that every decision would place children before publicity. He had agreed without hesitation. The center belonged to hope, not headlines. Lily, now brighter than anyone had seen her in years, hurried through the library carrying Charlotte's Web beneath one arm while leading 2 younger girls toward the reading corner. Her laughter floated through the building with effortless joy, no longer rare or fragile, but natural once again. William stood quietly near the doorway watching her, hands resting comfortably in his pockets. Success had brought him awards, magazine covers, and boardroom victories, yet none of those memories compared to hearing his daughter laugh without fear. Emily joined him, carrying a tray of fresh lemonade. "For the volunteers." "It sounds different now," William said softly. Emily looked toward the children. What does? The silence. She smiled gently, understanding immediately. Silence is not always sadness. Sometimes it is peace finally finding its way home. They stood together without another word as sunlight streamed through wide windows, filling the room with a warm golden glow. Nearby, Lily carefully showed a little boy how to fold his first paper swan. He frowned after making a crooked wing. "Mine does not look right," he whispered. Lily smiled exactly as Emily once had. It does not have to be perfect to make someone smile. Emily's eyes glistened for a brief moment before she quietly looked away. William noticed, but said nothing. Some gratitude was too deep for conversation. Later that afternoon, families gathered in the garden behind the center where herbs, wildflowers, and young maple trees swayed gently beneath the spring breeze. Children released dozens of folded paper swans into a small fountain, laughing as they floated across the water together. Lily walked over to Emily and slipped her small hand into hers. "I finished Charlotte's Web again," she said proudly. Emily smiled. "Did your favorite character change?" Lily thought for a moment before shaking her head. "No, but I learned something new." "What was that?" Lily looked first at Emily, then at her father waiting a few feet away. "The people who help you heal become part of your story forever." Emily knelt and hugged her gently. William felt his heart grow quiet in the best possible way. He realized that Grace House had never truly been built with money. Money had only purchased bricks, paint, and bookshelves. The Real Foundation had been laid by compassion, patience, forgiveness, and one ordinary waitress who chose kindness on an ordinary morning without knowing anyone was watching. As the afternoon sun slowly settled beyond the trees, paper swans drifted peacefully across the fountain while children's laughter echoed through the garden. And in that simple, beautiful moment, William finally understood that the richest life is not measured by the fortune a person keeps, but by the hope they leave behind in someone else's smile.